All right. First of all, just wanted to thank you all for letting me do this. I apologize for the slightly unconventional nature of my participation in class today, although it does fit in very well with my theme of integrating technology into the classroom. Anyway, first things first, I wanted to finish up the lead we started last week, and I was going to do that by presenting the topic I wish to discuss, and then I'll signal for you to pause. You can pause, discuss the topic, and then continue on. So we already talked a little bit about how your teachers have used technology in the classroom, how my teachers have used technology in the classroom, and a bit about kind of what types of technology could be used. So I think the next thing to discuss would be what are the kind of the risks of over-relying on technology in the classroom? Like, is there a downside to technology, or is technology just kind of automatically useful? So you can just pause it now, and then in a few seconds I'll continue. Okay, now that we've discussed a few of the potential risks of using technology in the classroom, the next question I would lead into is, how young do you think we should be introducing children to technology? I mean, one article I read suggested that there was a serious danger to introducing technology to younger children because, they become so preoccupied with the internet or video games or things like that, they kind of lose out on a lot of that early social development that's so crucial, especially in elementary school, kind of interacting with their peers, interacting with the teachers, and more importantly, just getting outside, getting exercise, getting fresh air. So, I mean, but at the same time, younger children have an easier time adapting to new information and new technology. So, to what extent should we introduce elementary students to technology, and what types of technology should we give them? Okay, so last week we talked a lot about kind of how to use technology, and we've already talked about a bit about the possible downsides of using technology. So the last question I really had about technology in the classroom is, how do we get companies to design technologies, particularly media, such as video games and movies, that are educational? Because obviously, while there's the potential for educational value, a lot of the stuff out right now, just to use the example of history, a lot of the quote-unquote historical video games are designed for fun first, and any sort of historical accuracy takes kind of a backseat to that. Same with many historical movies. Most of them are of questionable historical value. So the question I wanted to raise was, is it possible for us to make it profitable for companies to design media that is first and foremost educational? And secondly, in making education the primary goal of it, is there a chance that we could lose out on some of the value, what makes them entertaining in the first place? Because a lot of the benefit of using technology like video games in the classroom is its entertainment value. Students are having fun, and so they're more likely to participate and become actively involved. So, how do we use this technology and at the same time not lose the fun value that makes it useful in the first place? So next, I'm just going to go over the status of my final project, let you know how it's going. My final project for my teacher, Mr. Davis, was to construct kind of a review session for his students, because I was sitting in and helping him out mostly with his AP history class. And all for the past few weeks, they've been running review sessions where he assigned each student a different section of the class, and they would come up with any variety of ways to go over the knowledge with their classmates, which ranged from from PowerPoints and presentations to one group made a 30-minute video that's on YouTube. So for my presentation, I got the section on American imperialism and the time period leading up to the First World War. So what I decided to do is I constructed a PowerPoint presentation to go along with my review, and I also constructed a worksheet based off of the PowerPoint, and also did research into the notes or I went over a lot of the material that's online about the AP, and I reviewed old history textbooks to kind of refresh my knowledge of this period. And I actually ran the review session this past Tuesday. I had the whole class to do it, and afterwards my teacher informed me that he thought I did a very good job. I was able to kind of keep them from digressing, despite their attempts to kind of draw me into a conversation about National Treasure and Harry Potter and all that. Kind of kept them on task, and they seemed genuinely interested. A lot of times the students kind of have a lot of chatter in this particular classroom, but they stayed focused, and I managed to kind of present the material so it was relevant to them. So what I'll actually be putting in my portfolio will be a copy of the PowerPoint, and I can also email that, but I figured I'll have a printout of it, and also a printout of the review sheet and the review materials I used to kind of to show what I chose to focus on and why I chose the specific topics to address that I did, and why I felt those were important for the students to retain for their AP. So next, I mean, if you want to go on and talk about other things, next I was going to go over my sample lesson. So I'm going to pause it now, and you can restart when you want me to go over my sample lesson. So my lesson is going to focus on kind of how to use primary sources in a history class, specifically focusing on the documents and a primary source from right before the American Revolution, and trying to kind of not just read the primary source and understand its context, but also kind of how to spot bias in it, and thinking about how that bias might influence later scholars who read the text. So for the purpose of this lesson, I've chosen to focus on Common Sense, which is a pamphlet written by Thomas Paine shortly before the American Revolution, and is possibly one of the most famous pamphlets in American history. Pretty much any student is going to know something about Common Sense, probably read it or passages of it at some point, even going back as far as elementary school. So I've included a link to the document itself in the email I sent the link for this video in. So if you want, first might want to pull that up on the screen and check that out, and go over the first few passages. Don't have to read the whole thing, but go over for a few passages. And you can pause this video while you're going over those. All right, now you've read a little bit, just going into a little bit of background about Common Sense and Thomas Paine himself. Thomas Paine was actually born in England, and unfortunately for him, pretty much failed at every job he set himself out to do, including he worked as a supernumerary officer, excise officer. Both of these are government positions. Tried his hand at being an inventor, and all of these were crash and burn situations. And he ended up actually becoming an advocate for poor rights in England, and joined a group of protests asking for raising of kind of the pay for the poor, better pay, better working conditions, and eventually had to flee England to escape from debtor's prison, which a lot of people who came to America did at the time. Took a ship across and landed in the colonies, where he set himself up. He actually became an editor of the Pennsylvania Magazine, and tried to become an inventor, but what he's known for is his publishing. Now, Common Sense was published in January 1776, right as the Revolutionary War had begun. Washington was currently laying siege to Boston when it came out in Philadelphia. And the pamphlet was an instant success, was very, very widely read, very widely circulated, and Paine actually had to write it anonymously because the contents were so treasonous. If the British had known who he was and they had captured him, they would have hung him. So what Common Sense is this pamphlet is really what convinced the average American that the Revolutionary War was something worth getting behind. I mean, most Americans were somewhat, they didn't quite know what to do about the war. Obviously, the people in Boston were supporting revolution, but even there, there were loyalists. And you got to remember that most people in the colonies at this point did not think of themselves as Americans. They thought of themselves as servants of the British Crown. And they were still looking for reconciliation with the British Crown. And what Thomas Paine's common sense, among other factors, did was it convinced people that maybe we should create our own nation. Maybe we should, break away from Britain, and maybe we're not British. Maybe we're this new thing called Americans. Now that you have some background on it, let's go into kind of the general... let's start talking about how later historians might use common sense.